Now, mind you, we all are talkers, and we all have meals, holiday. We celebrate holidays together. And one word will flash, and the stories start.
My name is Faithe Norrell, as it's pronounced in Richmond. There's a school here named for our grandfather, Albert Norrell, elementary school that generations of children went to. However, when you leave Richmond, it's pronounced as it's spelled, which is Norrell. So when I introduce myself, I say, I'm Faithe Norrell, and this is my sister, Sondra Norrell-Thomas. So it's a little, it's fun.
My name is Sondra Norrell-Thomas.
I am getting ready to celebrate my 72nd birthday on July 30th.
I was born in Richmond, Virginia at 903 North 7th Street, 1941, and I am just finished with the 82nd birthday, May 31st.
Our family name is Norrell or Norrell, depending on what part of the country that you are living. We also have the name Morris on my mother's side, and we also have the Archer family. So my great-grandmother was an Archer, and there's a huge family that comes from Amelia County, Virginia, with the last name Archer. So those are our 3 family names. There's so many African Americans that don't know their family history. But our Morris family goes back to the early 1700s with William Morris. He lived in an area called Green Springs in Louisa County, and he took as his yellow wife a woman named Fanny, and he had children with her. They had to leave Amelia, they had to leave Green Springs and go to Louisville, Kentucky, which is where my grandfather was born. The Morris family, written by Ruth Morris Graham. Ruth married a man named Lorenz Graham, whose sister, Shirley Graham, was married to W.B. Du Bois. So Uncle Lorenz was also an author, so he wrote a lot of young adult stories. We have, I told you, we had the will of Colonel Richard Morris, and in which his yellow wife Fanny and her children are mentioned. We have another wonderful article done by my sister's dear friend Joseph Douglas. He's the descendant of Frederick Douglass's brother's family. So he did a very scholarly biography of Frederick Douglass, and in doing that came across the name of Charles Satchel Morris. So he gave us this excerpt on that. On my father's side, my grandmother, Kate Archer, is from Amelia County, Virginia. She was born enslaved, and her mother was a woman named Amy. So the enslaver was Robert P. Archer. He was a breeder. So he bought the first Kate in Mississippi, brought her to Chula, Mississippi, spelled with a T-C-H-U-L-A, and then he would move his workers between Chula, C-H-U-L-A, Amelia County, back to Chula, Mississippi. So he took as his yellow wife Kate number 1, had children with her. The only daughter was named Amy, and then he had children with his own daughter. So my grandmother and my great-grandmother are not only mother and daughter, but they're also siblings. So then we have photographs of the Norrell side of the family. So this is Albert Norrell and his wife, Kate Archer Norrell, in their later years. Kate also was a graduate of the Manly Colored and Normal School, but in those days when you married, women could not teach anymore, so she went home to be the first teacher to her 10 children, because I believe parents are our children's first teachers. Now, Kate is portrayed as a younger woman in this picture, along with her mother, Amy. So Amy is the sire of Kate number 1 and Robert P. Archer. And then Robert P. Archer had children with his own daughter, Amy. And these are 2 of their children, who is Kate Archer and Edinburgh Archer, who my father is named for. His last job was caretaker of Evergreen Cemetery. Now, they're not only mother and children, but they're siblings, because Robert Archer had children, with his own daughter. Our family has been doing family research for many years. In fact, our mother's aunt wrote a book called The Saga of the Morris Family. She did it based on family stories. My father was born in 1898. My mother was born in 1916, and she was the baby of 5 children with about a 20-year age span, as was my father, 20-year age span between the youngest and the oldest. He was the baby of his family.
And there were 10 children.
And there were 10 children.
And he was the 10th he was the 10th baby.
So they knew their family story. However, they kept the part about the incest secret. So it wasn't until my cousin Rosalind Norrell Nance was doing research that she was looking at dates and seeing these similar names, Kate and Kate. And there was no way that our Kate, our grandmother, whom Sondra actually knew, and this other Kate, who was born in the early 1800s, could be related. So eventually we found out about the incestuous yellow wife situation, which was very common. So on my mother's side, we can trace our family history back to the 1700s. On our father's side, to the very early 1800s.
We have been fortunate enough to visit Green Springs, Virginia. In fact, Faithe spent the night in the house. So it was just quite interesting to be there on the grounds. They call it plantation. We refused to call it plantation. We said the grounds. And they had all of the, it's a bread and breakfast now, and all of the slave quarters are redone, and they are the ones that they rent out for bread and breakfast.
So let me just qualify that.
Yes.
The slave quarters were usually farther out, so we really feel those were outbuildings. They were probably shops or blacksmith or the kitchen. We think that the slave quarters on Green Springs are gone because they've gentrified it. There's a swimming pool. It's really a resort. However, some of the other farms up and down that street still have their slave quarters, and they are very far away from the house. So that's why we know that those outbuildings were probably not slave quarters, but they still carry the feeling of the work that went on those work camps.
Well, I've only been there the one time, and it was just too much for me to take in all at one time. But you had the fortunate to be able to spend the night and stay with a cousin of ours.
So another kind of interesting fact, they were having a Green Springs Historical Foundation meeting and invited us. So the woman that invited us told all the other owners that they had just bought these farms, but the only true descendants of the original owners were the Morris girls, who were us. Black. women. So it was interesting. So the meeting was held at another farmhouse. And when Liza brought her auntie to the house, she just kept saying, I'm feeling something so strange in this house. This is not good feelings in this house. We do kind of have a gift in our family of vision. So we later found out that the house where the meeting took place was William Morris's wife's home. So she was probably very upset that these black women were in her home telling our untold story.
The stories that get swept under the rug.
Yes, just untold.
Right.
And forgotten.
And here you are, fortunate enough
To be able to tell them.
Right. To be able to tell it, to be able to have lived, to actually visit there and to see relatives and the other relatives that we have that are at Amelia, to meet them because we did not know them growing up.
I'm curious to know how you share this history, how you're ensuring that these stories and this history gets intentionally passed down to the next generation. Do you speak about this when you're sitting and gathering as a family? Do you have some sort of book, or is it written? How do you share this?
So we're very fortunate to know our family history because our aunt, my mother's sister, older sister, wrote the saga of the Morris family. And she did that from a lot of family narratives that she had gotten the information from. My mother's father was a minister named the Reverend Charles Satchel Morris. And he and actually his mother was a college graduate in the mid-1800s. Very unusual for any women to be college educated in those days. But they were related to a Reverend Bishop Payne at Wilberforce University. So they went to Oberlin and Wilberforce. While there, Lizzie Satchel, my grandfather's mother, met a young woman named Rosetta Douglas. Rosetta Douglas was the daughter of Frederick Douglass. My grandfather eventually came to work for Frederick Douglass because he married Rosetta's daughter, Anna. So he worked for many years for Frederick Douglass as his secretary. He was an orator. In fact, Frederick Douglass is known to say he wanted to come on first because fire and lightning was going to follow him. He did not want to be upstaged by my grandfather. So he was an evangelist. He was a missionary. He traveled to South Africa. He, in fact, brought 3 Zulu chiefs' sons back with him to America to be educated with the promise that they would go back to South Africa. 2 of them did, and one of them was the co-founder with Nelson Mandela of the ANC. Now, let me also say that I have this opportunity to share our stories because I love history. We would be driving and we would pass something and I'd say, children, and both of them would know a history lesson is coming. Their mom's a natural teacher as well as a trained teacher. But now I have the opportunity to tell those stories because I work at the Black History Museum and Cultural Center of Virginia. So I enjoy sharing this information, not only with the patrons of the museum, but I've been asked to go often into the community to tell stories. Often these stories are the untold stories, the seldom told stories, the forgotten stories. But we always tell stories that inspire. So I get to represent the museum and tell the museum stories that are included in our permanent exhibition. But I always think history needs to be living. So that's what's so important, that I'm able to tell my story, because then the stories come alive. So when I can tell a story about a yellow wife, I can say, I look like this, not because of choices. I look like this because my ancestors, the women in my family, didn't have agency. They were born enslaved, and therefore they had to come under the power of their enslaver. So this is how we look like this. I can also tell stories of Frederick Douglass in a personal way. I can put him in perspective for third graders to also understand that Frederick Douglass would have been my great grandfather, which is still a little odd to them because our generations are so long. On both of our sides, our grandmothers were having children into their 40s. So that's unusual. We at least live where most people have, 4 or 5 generations. We only have 2. So to be able to tell children that my grandfather were born enslaved makes them understand that these horrors that were done in our country was really not that long ago.
We also have a cousin and with Faithe and 2 cousins that have done extensive research on the Norrell family. And we had that written, and it went out to all of the children and all of the relatives. And we have family reunions on both sides. With the one in the Norrell family, we usually have it here in Richmond. And they get to see where their great-great-grandfather lived, or their uncles and aunts, whatever.
And they see the school.
And they see the school. And so it's given to them